Hi everybody. Yesterday I did a review of a movie called The Giant Gila Monster, which is a companion to this one that I'm going to talk about today called The Killer Shrews. This is a really great quality remaster of these two movies. Although I didn't really care too much for The Giant Gila Monster, I do like The Killer Shrews, and on this particular release, which is very well rendered by, I got to give them credit again, Film Masters. This special edition has The Killer Shrews as an extra bonus film on here. And quite frankly, I bought this for The Killer Shrews. Killer Shrews, just like The Giant Gila Monster, is not technically a good movie. But as far as being satisfying in spots, it is. And I'm going to go into it now. This was directed by Ray Kellogg, who also directed The Giant Gila Monster. Produced by Ken Curtis and Gordon McLendon, both of who play some of the characters in the movies, the two producers. Okay, so the story is that there's a ship which is manned by Captain Thorne Sherman, and he's played by James Best, and he's delivering supplies to a remote island at a research compound. Some compound this is. It really consists of a little house, a little cozy house when you get down to it. But because there's a hurricane imminent, it turns out that Captain Thorne Sherman is not going to be able to return. He wants to stay there and go back the next day or so. So that's exactly what he does. He winds up staying at the house along with 5 people. You've got an elderly doctor, scientist, and his research assistant. Research assistant is played by Gordon McLendon, who is a very bad actor in here. And then also you have the old doctor's daughter, and you have her fiance. The fiance is played by Ken Curtis, the other producer. He's much better in the role. And he's also a drunk in here. And it doesn't take long before things start getting crazy, which I'll talk about in a moment. They also have a house servant with them. That's also at this location. So these characters all get together in there, and they're going to await, I guess, the hurricane, the storm that's imminent. Now, there's a love triangle that almost predictably develops between the suave Thorne Sherman captain and the very jealous fiance, played by Ken Curtis. So that's a little element here that kind of like gets your interest and works a little bit in a movie that's otherwise rather talky. Now, I hate using the term talky, because I like talking in movies. I always say this whenever I say something's too talky, because for me that says a lot. Because I like character development, and I like plot, and I like to get to know the people, but there's a difference when it's not working and it's a lot of padding and it just seems to go on and on forever. And although this film, I think, is about 68 minutes, not even 70 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, it feels longer at first because a lot of these scenes are getting padded out. But it's worth the wait as I go on and tell you about the rest of it. All right. The doctor, the old scientist, is hard to understand. At least for me it was. I had to put the subtitles on to get the idea. But he's experimenting on shrews. I don't know what shrews are. I've heard of Taming of the Shrew. I don't know what shrews really are. But he's trying to reduce the impact of human overpopulation. And he thinks if he can shrink the human race down to half their size, it'll help the population problem. Hey, this is what's fun about these movies, right? But his experiments resulted in mutations. So the shrews actually grew bigger, and they become the size of medium-sized dogs. Okay? In fact, the shrews, don't tell anybody, are played by dogs. And my research tells me they're coonhounds. I don't know what coonhounds are, but apparently those are the actors that play the shrews, monsters. And once they get going and start doing their thing and try to attack our cast, it becomes more interesting. But it's a ways to get there. I would say the last 20 minutes or so of this movie, around there, are worth waiting for. It's the first 40 plus or so that are a little bit rough. But things start getting crazy as these animals with their fangs, giant fangs, are trying to frantically get into the house. And immediately I was reminded of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Remember when the zombies are attacking people in the house, the Night of the Living Dead, and they got to quick barricade everything, nail up boards, push furniture, do anything they can to the openings to try to keep the zombies out? Well, that's what's going on here, and I can't help but think that George Romero was inspired by this movie. There's even a scene in there where I don't want to really ruin it, but the two men are always at odds, the fiancé and the ship's captain, and they're always fighting. And just a lot like with Night of the Living Dead, a scene happens where one of them runs back into the house in safety and closes the door on our hero when he's knocking in. Not let me in here, let me in here. He gets in just in time before the shrews can get to him, much like Night of the Living Dead zombies. And what does he proceed to do? Turn on the guy that kept him out in the cold for a while and almost had him killed, and starts punching and wailing on him. That reminds me later of Night of the Living Dead. That's one scene I noticed. There's a lot of similarities to Night of the Living Dead. I think George Romero picked something up from here. I think he picked some stuff up from 1964's The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. I think he picked something up from Invaders from Mars in the late 50s. Not Invaders from Mars. Oh, I forgot the name of it. It's another movie from the late 50s. Invisible Invaders. But I'm not here to talk just about George Romero and how he pinched a lot of this stuff. That could be for another video, maybe. But anyway, as they're trying to keep alive in here, and these shrews are getting in, it becomes kind of tense. And there is one really good jump scare. I'm not going to tell you where it's at. When you see the movie, if you're going to see the movie, there's one good jump scare. It had me jump, and that doesn't happen very often. So that was really pretty well orchestrated, I got to say. And these things are scary, these things, you know. It turns out that for the longer shots, the killer shrews are played by the dogs wearing extra hairy costumes. They're kind of like, they overdress them, kind of to make them look like hairy mutants. And there's some really cool close-ups. Anytime you see these things up close, it's hand puppets or a hand puppet. Can't imagine there were that many because the budget wasn't that big. And I think they really make an impression and are kind of spooky and unsettling for this kind of a movie. And I like the way at the end, the hero has an idea to take a few empty 50-gallon steel chemical drums that he finds, and they decide that if they can all put these drums over their heads individually, each one, they can crouch down and crawl out to safety to get back to the boat, which is still docked, his ship from the, way back when, and get to the water and, elude these things and get rid of them. And that was pretty interesting and a smart know-how. But anyway, I do think the end of this movie, the last 20 minutes of this movie, were worth looking at if you're a fan of horror and sci-fi. Don't expect a great movie. It's not a great movie at all. Again, a lot of times people tell me in the comments, sometimes they say, well, if a movie, and I agree, if a movie you find entertaining, then it's a good movie, they say. Don't say it's not a good movie, then proceed to tell you how entertaining it is. Look, there's too much in the first 40 that's just a lot of yada, yada, yada talk until we get to the end, number one. It's worth seeing for the end, and I can only give it 2 out of 4 stars. But that's still average and worth seeing by my book. I didn't know this, but when I was doing research into this, in 2012, there was a sequel. Now, this Killer Shrews was 1959, so that's a hell of a long time. There was a sequel called Return of the Killer Shrews, and James Best, who plays Lorne Sherman, returns for the movie, which is interesting. And I was amazed to hear that in the role of the guy who was the jealous fiance and his rival, Bruce Davison, who is known as Willard. He was in the original Willard. So I know I want to track this thing down and see Return of the Killer Shrews. Anybody out there seen it? Let me know what it's like. It's a lot of talking for this movie, but it's a fun one, unlike the Giant Gila Monster.